join us. So, okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming out tonight. It's been fairly wild weather recently, so it's great to see people that have braved the elements to come out with us. And our speaker tonight, Steve, has come up from the Central Belt, so he's had even more arduous journey than most of us. And welcome, if you're watching on YouTube, to tonight's adventures that we're going to have, say, after a period of lockdown where we've all had our travel restricted fairly severely. I think tonight's a great opportunity because we're going to get a virtual tour of the world. So a couple of years ago, Steve set off from Ardenwerken and headed around the world on his motorbike. And we're going to hear all about the trials and tribulations of that. And some of you will remember Steve from last year when we were doing all of our talks just through lockdown. And he recounted his adventures of cycling from motorcycling, I should say, from Patagonia to Alaska. And that should still be available on our YouTube channel if you missed it. So that's another adventure worth watching. But tonight, terrific that Steve's come all the way up here to join us. It's great to meet him in person after the meeting only got over the screen last year. And so thanks ever so much for coming up. And we really look forward to hearing your tales of circumnavigating the world. Okay. So over to you, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So as Mike said, this is a story of a motorcycle journey that I did around the world in 2018. And I had done a couple of trips before, two kind of major trips before. One was to the Nordkapp in Norway, which was the Ride to the Midnight Sun trip. Now, the Nordkapp is the most northerly mainland point in Europe, mainland Europe. It's about 700 miles above the Arctic Circle, and it's 1,300 miles from the North Pole, so it's pretty well north. So it was a really good trip. It was only 2 weeks and 1 day that I was away for, and it was 5,000 miles, so it was quite hard going, but it was just a real excitement to go there. It was a real excitement to ride my bike from Scotland and cross the Arctic Circle, and that gave me the hunger for something bigger and better. And that came along in 2015, where with two friends, we decided that we'd ride from the bottom of Argentina, the island of Tierra del Fuego, Ushuaia, right up to the top of North America to the Dalton Highway in Alaska. That was a big epic trip. That was 4.5 months and 23,500 miles, which again was a great adventure. So I actually had to give up work to go and do we call it llamas, bananas and bears trip. So when I got back, then I wasn't in a position not to work. So I got a job in Tesco Bank in Edinburgh, and decided that I would, I'd have to keep working for a while. I still had that hunger to do something else, and I really wanted to ride around the world, but I wasn't too sure how I would do it because it's a big commitment. It's a big commitment from a family. Commitment to go away for 4.5 months. In fact, when I come back from the Argentina trip, my wife described me as having turned native because normal life was difficult to adjust back to. And then, of course, there's the finances and the fact that you're working, and I didn't want to give work up again. So I thought hard about it, and I come up with an idea that I could potentially ride around the world, but split it into two different sections. And the first section there would be riding from Scotland all the way across Europe and Asia, mainly in Russia, but dropping down into Mongolia because I really wanted to go and see Mongolia, and end up in Vladivostok, which is in the Sea of Japan and the Russian Far East. And then after that, come back, do some more work, and then the next year go out and ride from San Francisco to Boston. So that was the plan, but I still had some problems around it. For example, how would I get my bike back from Vladivostok once I get out there? Because obviously if I rode it back, it would turn it into another massive trip. And I was listening to a podcast called Adventure Rider Radio one night, and I heard a guy on the radio from Russia, a guy called Alex from Rus Motor Travel, a company had just started up. And he was doing escorted tours across Russia. And one of the escorted tours was from Moscow to Vladivostok. and you could either rent bikes from him or take your own bike. So I didn't really want to go on an escorted tour, but the more I thought about it, I thought Alex actually ships the bikes back from Vladivostok and the Trans-Siberian rail line. I would be riding for him for part of the journey if I could make an agreement with him where I would get used to Russia. Obviously, I don't speak any Russian. I couldn't read the signs, so it would maybe help with that. So I contacted him and said, can we do a deal where I ride part of the journey with you? And Alex was happy to do that. So there I had a firm plan in place. So the plan was I would ride to Moscow, which is about 1,900 miles, hook up with the Rus Motor Travel, Alec and his Rus Motor Travel team. I would ride with Alex and his team to Novosibirsk, which is in the western side of Siberia. And then that would be me done with the Rus Motor Travel piece. I would drop down into Mongolia, ride through Mongolia, come back up into Siberia, and then ride out to Vladivostok. It was going to be a combination of hotels. With Alex, it was hotels, but I was hoping to do a bit of camping as well. And I created a Facebook group for posts so as people could follow along. So I was ready to roll in May 2018, and the route I was going to take was obviously the UK into the Netherlands, the ferry down by Newcastle, ride through Germany, through Poland, and then not the most direct route, but staying in the EU, I'd go up into Lithuania and Latvia, and then into Russia. So that was just one border crossing, which made life a bit easier. I had 6 weeks to do it, so I took 3 weeks unpaid leave. The workplace was great with it, and I took 3 weeks built up holidays, and I would be riding the same bike as I rode in all the other trips, which is a 2009 BMW R1200 GS, which is the kind of same bike as you'd see Ewan and Charlie on in their earlier adventures. As far as preparation was concerned, when I come back from, anybody watched the Argentina to Alaska, I gave the bike a fair amount of punishment. So when I come back from that trip, I found a little garage in Kirkintilloch, which is near me in Glasgow, where a guy was willing to refurb it for me. It's a nice traditional little motorcycle garage, and I bought some second-hand spares, and we bought some new spares, and we rebuilt the bike. So he, again, prepared it for this big journey, prepares it for all of the journeys. I tried to buy, I've got a Garmin sat-nav on the bike, and I tried to buy an official Russian SD card, but it wasn't available. So eventually I bought something out at eBay, which turned out to be actually very good. I had to convert my keyboard into Cyrillic and kind of work my way through it, but I could see where I was effectively. So it was worthwhile. I downloaded an app called iOverlander, which was useful because basically people will log where they wild camp in that, and they'll maybe make a report saying it's by water, it's fairly safe, it's away from houses. So I downloaded that. And a big learning from the Argentina to Alaska trip was I wanted a freestanding tent where you could pitch it in rocks, or if it was a tight pitch, you were able to pitch it anywhere. So I bought one of those. As far as paperwork was concerned, the Mongolian visa was pretty straightforward. It wasn't a problem at all. But the Russian visa was difficult because I had to enter Russia 3 times. I would be entering Russia from Latvia. I would be then entering Russia again from Mongolia. And then I'd have to go back to Russia to pick up my bike that would be shipped back to Moscow. And a tourist visa doesn't cover that. You need a business visa, and you need an invitation letter from a company. So it's obviously strictly not correct, but there's companies that organise invitation letters. So I got in touch with a company, and they managed to, they were organising it for me, and it was all going really well until the Novichok poisoning, which put a stop to everything. So that was not too long before my trip, and it was quite a nervous 4 or 6 weeks of delay that was in place, and I wasn't too sure if I was going to get it. But eventually it came through, and I was ready to roll, ready to move. I thought about a starting point. I thought about starting from home, but then I thought, well, I'm going to ride around the world, and I'm going to end up in Boston at Boston Aquarium, looking out onto the Atlantic, looking east. So I thought I'll go to the most westernly mainland point in the UK, which is Ardnamurchan, and I'll start from there. And it was really good because it coincided with a small motorbike rally that they do called the Wildcat Rally that was happening out in that direction. So I went to the rally and then went with 3 of my friends out to the Ardnamurchan Lighthouse and looked out to sea. And that was my starting point for the whole trip. And this was me arriving at Newcastle and getting ready for the ferry across to the Netherlands. It was a nice, easy trip over. So I got into mainland Europe and I started to camp my way east. So that the first picture there with the sun shining is a campsite in Germany. That was my first camp, and it's a brilliant little field that I camped in, and as you can see, the weather was really good. And then the second one there was I was riding through Poland, so generally into Poland that day, riding through Poland, and I saw all these Harley Davidsons. So I'm thinking, I was wondering what was going on. So I stopped to fuel up, and I started talking to a couple of guys that were from Belgium. And they were telling me that it's the biggest European Harley Davidson rally of the year was taking place on my route in Poland. So as I drove in that direction, I stopped off where it was taking place, and it was like huge gates and a big enclosed area and masses of stuff going on, bands and food and all the rest of it. But it was the day before the rally officially started, even though there was a lot of Harleys arriving. So I went up to the gate and said, can I camp overnight? And they said, yeah. So I went in, and I went into the corner of the campsite, but there was this BMW and a sea of Harleys, which was quite nice. And other than the marshals, there was a couple of marshals going around on bikes, being very aggressive, wanting to get me thrown back out. The people that were there were all dead friendly, and the Belgian guys actually saw me later that night and bought me my dinner and wished me well in my trip. So it was quite a nice stop. So I continued from there and stopped off at the beautiful city of Gdansk, and then made my way, skirted past Warsaw up into northern Poland, which was really quite nice, rolling green hills, quite beautiful, and stayed a night there. And then in one day, because they're quite small countries, I moved through Lithuania and into Latvia, and I ended up in this town on the Russian border. And it was a small town with a one hotel in the square, I think maybe even used to be the town hall. And as I was checking in, I noticed that there was another biker there, and he was a Dutch guy on it with a Dutch plate. So I wondered if he could be one of the guys that are on the same tour as me. And when I talked to him, it turns out he was. So it was quite nice to meet up with him. And we'd dinner that night. We'd agreed we'd cross the Russian border in the morning together, which is always a good thing. You have company in a border. So we reached the border, the Russian border, and it reminded me very much of South America and Central America, which was long lines, ridiculous amounts of paperwork, moving from office to office to hut to hut. But eventually we made our way through, and while we were there was another couple of big BMWs pulled up, and it was, again, 2 of the people that were going on the tour, one from Germany, one from Austria. So we all made our way through, and the Austrian and German guy headed off, while the Dutch guy and I, Derek, the Dutch guy and I, we stopped at the first fuel station where you could buy motorcycle insurance for Russia. So that was another hour of hard work, but eventually we got there and we moved on. And Russia itself was just nice tarmac roads, tree-lined, rolling hills, as we headed toward Moscow, and we had one overnight stop before we got there. But eventually we got to Moscow, and I'm sure some of you have been to Moscow, but I'd never been to Russia before. It's a beautiful city. It's really modern, but with brilliant old architecture. The people were really friendly, and I spent a couple of days there just acclimatising after having ridden to Moscow. I really enjoyed it, the city itself. So at that, during the time in Moscow, I met up with the Rus motor travel team. As you can see, we were a very mature bunch. The young guy on the right is one of the tour. He was another Alex. There was two tour guides, Alex and the other Alex, and they both. It wasn't like vans. They're both in motorcycles. But yeah, it was quite a mix of people. So there was an American, two French Canadians, including the lady who was 70 years old. There was a German, an Austrian, and a Dutchman. So quite a mix indeed, and all really nice people. So we got acquainted during those 2 days, and we set off heading east. So this was the route that Rus Motor Travel, this is their map that we would take from Moscow down to Vladivostok. So they were going all the way. The first black line is Novosibirsk, and that was where I would cut off from them. So kind of roughly halfway, just under halfway, I would cut off from and head down into Mongolia. And then I would pop back up onto the route in Ulan-Ude in Russia and in central Siberia. And I wouldn't catch them. They would be gone because I would be taking a longer route through Mongolia. But that was the overall plan. So before too long, we were heading east, and we were staying in fact, all of the time we were staying in cities. Most of the time, the cities were based on a large river, like you would see there. And we'd stop off now and again, but not too often, to be honest. And I was glad it wasn't too touristy, but we'd stop off at sites such as the church there. And again, there was some beautiful sights to be seen. The countryside was not too interesting. It was flat, and it progressively get poorer the further away from Moscow you went. But yeah, there was still some nice sights to be seen, and the cities were actually pretty nice, to be honest with you. And we're basically the route is the Trans-Siberian Highway that's kind of constructed now, that goes all the way. So the Trans-Siberian Highway itself was a big quality tarmac road. But again, the beauty of travelling with Alex and his team was that he would take us on more interesting roads and plenty of interesting diversions. So, and I probably wouldn't have had the confidence to do that if I'd been doing it myself. I'd have probably been mainly in the tarmac. So that was another advantage of going along with the guys. Now, one of the stops there was the Kalashnikov Gun Factory. So that was quite an interesting stop, where they made the famous rifle, or probably the infamous rifle. And it's got an interesting story. A guy, him and his family had been sent out to the gulags. And as a 15-year-old boy, he had walked back and got a job in the army, and was this brilliant technical mechanical person, invented the guns and started the company, and it just became a famous worldwide company. But as well as stopping off at the odd thing, the other good thing is with Alex, the hotels you stayed in were kind of 3-star and all good, and everything was fine. But the lunch stops were always really interesting, because we'd stop in trucker stops, or we'd stop in village cafes, and the people were extremely interested in this bunch of people in big motorcycles. I mean, it was like they probably hadn't seen it before. And that was typical Russian food. It was, stewy, vegetable, meaty soups. But yeah, it was okay. It was fine. It was after a hard day's ride, it worked out pretty well. So after 1,050 miles, we ended up crossing into Asia. And that was another one of those moments when I talked about riding my motorcycle from Glasgow to the Arctic Circle. Riding my motorcycle from Ardermurchan to Asia was just a really good feeling. So we crossed into Asia, and we'd be in Asia from now on. So continued east, more cities, more nice cities, beautiful rivers. And when I talked about some of the lunch stops were interesting, and thankfully I'd had my lunch before I went to this toilet. But it was really it was really pretty rough. Some of the, as I said, the further east you went in the countryside, the poorer and the rougher it became. But people, of course, were just as friendly, or if not more friendly, when we were out there. For a biker, this was a really interesting stop at the Euro Motorcycle Factory. It's a massively huge manufacturing facility, but they're left in one little corner of it, just because the manufacturing, the volume has went down massively. But the design for Euros was stolen from the Germans in World War II. They just nicked the BMW design and they've used it ever since. And they mainly used them for pulling sidecars. So it was nice to see, and there's a big resurgence in bikes, vintage-looking bikes, or classic-looking bikes is probably a better way to put it. And there's an interest in sidecars, so I do think that they've got an opportunity to grow, maybe not to what they were before, but certainly to grow and remain in business. So finally, after 2,100 miles, we got to Novosibirsk. And that would be the point where I was splitting up from the guys. I wasn't splitting up straight away because we spent a couple of days there. So myself and Graham, I didn't mention Graham, an English guy living in Aberdeenshire, was there as well. So Graham and I were on our own bikes, so we needed to get our bikes serviced. So we organised that. And I got my tyres changed from more road orientated to more off-road orientated for Mongolia. And we, it was a bit of a rest. We did a little excursion as well while we were in Novosibirsk, and that was a train graveyard, which was quite amazing. I mean, these just massive, huge locomotives and carriages, and they had various versions of them. There were hospital trains with full operating theatres, and this one here that I'm in is a prison train that they would use to take the prisoners out to the gulags in Siberia. I'm sure they'd be more full on the way out than the way back, because a lot of people perished out there, of course. So that was two days in Novosibirsk, and then it was time to say farewell to the guys. And that was them. They were gone. I waited for a while and left later than them. The bike that you can see in the picture there was one of the guys, one French-Canadian guy, felt as if the pace was too fast. And he was also feeling a bit ill. So he decided he would carry on with them, but they would route him by train and they would ship the bike back to Moscow. So that's why that bike was still sitting there. But we, a big mixture of feelings. I was like sad to see them go. I'd made some new friends. I was nervous about the road ahead, but also excited. I set off from Novosibirsk, and just outside of Novosibirsk, I got decided I'd fuel up. So I fueled up and crossed out of the garage, and straight away I was pulled over by this very grumpy policeman. So I thought, I can't believe it. It's like I'm not 10 minutes on the road, and I'm pulled over by the cops. But he was. So he was quite kind of grumpy and angry, and I did what I always do in these cases. In America, it usually works is I get the Scottish element into it. So I'm there playing the bagpipes to him, and then I'm trying the whiskey, and he's looking at me, kind of blankly bemused. And then he suddenly went, "Braveheart," and we both went, "Freedom!" And he said, Go, let me go. So apparently he was telling me I'd crossed a double white line, but that was it. And he just went away laughing back to his police car, and I thought, oh, great. So yes, it was a nice moment. Again, a nice moment. So I was heading southeast, basically there, to head down to Mongolia. It was 600 miles roughly from Novosibirsk to Mongolia border. And I was going through an area called the Russian Altai. So the Altai Mountains cover the edge of Mongolia and Kazakhstan and Russia. And I kind of had missed this in my planning, to be honest with you. So this was coming as a bigger surprise to me. I mean, there's lots of mountains at over 4,000 feet, and there's snow leopards in the mountains. So it's really remote and really beautiful. So I was instantly into the best riding that I'd had of the trip. You know, it was like, yeah, there was some long straight roads with the mountains, but there's a lot of curves and great tarmac and through the mountains. So I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I stayed halfway, and as I do in these kind of trips, I did my washing in the sink that night and hung it out. And next morning I set off for the border, the Mongolian border, and that's probably about 150 miles in, and I thought, my washing's still in the line, so I'd lost half of my clothes, or more than half of my clothes, and there was no way I could get back for them. So there's guys running about with my t-shirts on out there now. But yeah, so eventually I got to the border town between Russia and Mongolia, and I arrived on Saturday night, and I discovered that the border was closed and wouldn't be open until Monday. And I booked into this cheap but very swish-looking motel for that area, or hotel, which was supposedly had Wi-Fi and air conditioning stuff, which was badly needed. But to be honest, it was unfinished, is probably how I'd describe it. So, but it was fine. It did me for a couple of days. And it was one of those typical border towns where they had no facilities really, you know, so all I could do is go to the wee local shop and buy bread and cheese and wait for Monday coming. So eventually Monday came, and I went up to the Mongolian border and got into the Russian bit. It was good because they let my motorcycle pass all the trucks that were waiting. And I got into the Russian checkpoint, and they made me, it was outdoor tables, it was bright, warm sunshine. They made me spread my luggage out on the tables. So they're searching through it, and they got to my medical bag, and they found this. So they started talking to each other, and you can see it's boots, right? So I'm not a bad guy. So they started talking to each other, get all animated, trying, asking me questions. Obviously, that wasn't working very well. They told me to wait, and they went away for about an hour. I was getting really warm. I'm stripping the bike gear off and whatever. Eventually, they come back and told me to pack my stuff and follow them. So I followed them, thinking this is bizarre. So I followed them, and they took me around the back of their offices, and then they made me stand with a paracetamol with codeine in it. They made me the boots pack. They made me stand and hold it, and they put civilians to each side of me. And I'm thinking, this is getting slightly scary now. What are they doing? Is this some kind of setup? And then he told me to put the stuff away, and he took me by the arm, and they took me into the office. And I genuinely thought, right, am I going to a cell, or am I going to an office? Because I thought, this is bizarre. So they took me to an office, thankfully not a cell, and sat me down. And a guy, they got a young girl who worked there who spoke, you know, a little English, and was kind of between her and me and the guy. We started filling out all these forms, but she was able to tell me that it was drugs I was carrying. And I thought, no, how do you tell a Russian that it's from Boots, the chemist in Lindsay? It can't possibly be drugs. It's like, and apparently, yes, it's considered a drug in Russia. So eventually, they retained my drugs and let me go. But it was nerve-wracking. It was nerve-wracking at the end. But finally, I went, and thankfully, I was on my way and through the border safely into Mongolia. So Mongolia, again, the first border town, I think it's maybe something like 50 miles into Mongolia, but Mongolia instantly was everything. It happened a lot in South America where you crossed borders and places became different, bizarrely, but Mongolia was just beautiful as well. And I had my big concern was about what are the road surfaces like in Mongolia, because it's just travelers just tell tales, and you get updates and things change all the time. But the road to Ulgi was gravel, and rutted, kind corrugated they call it, where you can bounce across it. But it was very manageable, and I thought, if this is it, then I'm a happy man. And on the way, I saw a couple of golden eagles, and again, I just thought, oh, I've rode my bike from Scotland to Mongolia. This is just so cool. So it was a good feeling. And I arrived in Ulgi, and there was a entrepreneurial guy grabbed me straight away and says, "I've got accommodation, follow me." Which I thought, okay, I can follow him because I'll just back off if I feel it's unsafe where he's going. And anyway, he didn't take me too far, and he got to a place where there was a couple of yurts and his house, and he offered me a room in his house. And I thought, okay, and he said he would go and help me get a SIM for my phone and stuff. I thought, that's fine. So, and then a Spanish guy was accosted as well, and he was pulled in, and he had a motorbike. So I sat with the Spanish guy. He was staying in the yurt, and we had dinner in the yurt that night. So it was a great start to the Mongolian experience. They did go and they took us and got us a SIM card, a Mongolian SIM card, but it never worked. So, but they tried. So Mongolia itself, there's kind of several kind of bikey routes through it, but they call this the southern route. They actually call it the southern route, but I put /central because it's not very southern. I think it's southern because below that there's kind of nothing there. So it's the southern of the routes, the major routes. So I decided I'd take this southern route, which takes you through the Gobi Desert. Again, I was concerned about how the roads would be. For each of the sections, I had an idea how it might be, and for this first section to a place called Coved, I kind of expected it to be a third tarmac, and then a third, 2/3 gravel, and it wasn't too far to go. Well, it shouldn't have been. It was about 150 miles. So I started off the next morning down the route, and I started off in glorious sunshine, glorious tarmac, just, loving being in Mongolia. I saw herds of wild horses, I saw camels, solitary camels, bunches of camels. It was just a beautiful place to be. And eventually, as the travellers had reported, the road turned to gravel, and that's excellent gravel. So I thought, oh, this is great, this is fine, this is just perfect for me. But a little further on, and not much further on at all, the gravel suddenly disappeared and it turned to sand, which was my worst nightmare. I've never ridden in sand, and this bike with all that luggage weighs about half a ton, literally half a ton. So what was actually happening was the Mongolians are getting the Chinese to build them tarmac roads, but I'm assuming that they're building the tarmac roads on the gravel sections, so they're using that as their line. So effectively what they do is, if they're building a tarmac road, and this one they're building for the full 100 miles, they just knock you off into the desert, and there's tracks, sometimes there's a kind of main defined track, sometimes there's often multiple tracks. And sometimes it stays in line with where the road building's going, and other times it doesn't. So it was a real challenge straight away, and of course within a few minutes I was picking it up. That's quite a nice angle to fall at because the sand has got it there. So I just need to heave it up, but it's still a big heavy bike. So I started just edging my way and going on and on and on, and it seemed to be taking forever. I was obviously probably going at too slow a pace to ride a bike like that in sand, but I was worried because there was hardly ever anybody about, and I was a bit concerned about falling off and hurting myself. So I kept going, and eventually I thought, I'm probably really lost. I wonder where this town is. And I made the mistake that I'd read about, and that is, it's pointless asking a bunch of Mongolians out in the wilderness to look at your map, because they've probably never seen a map before. And I'd read that, and I saw a bunch of Mongolians. I thought, I'll get them to look at my map. So I went and showed them the map, and they're just saying China, China, China. And I thought, oh, have I seriously overshot this? Have I seriously took the wrong road? And really getting quite nervous about it. And I was getting low in water as well. And then suddenly, out of the blue, like the US cavalry or something, rode come up out of the horizon, came these three big BMW motorbikes. So I waved them down, and it was three Russians. And I said, I explained, and they spoke English. It was like, oh, brilliant. So they said, yeah, the town's maybe 50 kilometres further on, you'll be in tarmac soon, don't worry about it, it's all good. And I thought, great. And I saw that as they were riding towards me, they were a lot more confident than me in terms of their riding. So I thought, right, okay, I'm going to stick with these guys, whether they like it or not. So when they took off, I rode and got behind the first guy, the fastest guy. And I just followed him, and I was thoroughly enjoyed it because I had confidence that if I fell off, there was two behind me that would pick me up. And so I rode with him for about 5 miles, and I thought, this is great. I'm going to ride with them to the town. And suddenly we'd lost the other two, and the fastest guy stopped, and he says, right, you should go now. I said, oh, okay. I thought, okay. He says, yeah, you should go now. I says, okay, so I'll go. So I went, and I learned later why I had to go, but I thought, oh no. So within half an hour, I was completely hopelessly lost again. So I then saw a kind of industrial thing, an oil thing or something, and I headed towards that. And this is just pure desert. And there was a pickup truck, and again, my luck was there because there was an old Chinese guy who didn't speak English, but a young Mongolian who did. And he said to me, he says, if we're going back to our camp, but if you follow me, and then I'll take you back and point you in the direction of the town. It's not far away. It's maybe, 10 miles. I thought, oh, perfect. So I started to follow them, and they were in a big Nissan four-wheel drive. And the sand was getting deeper, and I was going faster, and they were going faster, and the inevitable wallop, down I goes, and they disappeared at the horizon. So I'm lifting the bike up and trying to get it turned around, and I goes for a drink of water, and my water bottle had burst, and I thought, you couldn't make this up with day one in Mongolia. So, but eventually the pickup truck came back, and they said, oh, sorry, we didn't see you. And I explained to them, I said, look, I can't, I'll need to go slow behind you. I can't keep up with you in this deep sand. And he says, no, don't worry. So what they did was they popped up onto the tundra, off the road, and I had no idea what the surface would be like. And I popped up, and it was magical. And we just rode for 5 miles across the wilderness, me following them and absolutely loving it. And it was solid and great and just superb fun. So finally they got me within sight of the town, and I thanked them a lot. And they let me go, and I got to the town that night, and was very happy to find a wee hotel and get a dinner and get to my bed that night and worry about the next day. And the next day was a little bit further to Alti. It was, I think it's about 170 miles for the next day. And allegedly, based on what I'd read, it was half tarmac, half gravel. So I started out thinking, okay, I just hope it is. Please be gravel. Please don't be building a road. So I started out, headed along again, loving the place. Mongolia was beautiful. You could stop off at shrines, and anywhere you stopped for fuel or whatever, people were really friendly. And I came to where I knew that the gravel would start and the road get better. And I'm thinking, this is brand new tarmac. And actually what I'd struck was they'd actually finished the road for this bit. So I just made an easy, great day of just riding into this town with no worries at all, and get checked into a hotel for the night and got my bike fueled up and my food. And it was just a really lucky, restful time after the day before. But it was that night that I discovered that Mongolians love like Japanese karaoke, and they were belting out Delilah all night to the early hours of the morning down below my room. But it just made me smile. It wasn't a big deal. It was better than being stuck in sand. So the next day, I was heading to unpronounceable, almost Bayar Kagor, which was the final town in the Gobi Desert, and from there I'd turn north. So I knew that would be, I knew once I got to that town that there was tarmac all the way up to Russia, actually. So this would be the last of the hard bits, but it was the longest path. It was something like 240 miles. And again, it was allegedly around about a third tarmac, and the rest would be gravel, we hoped. So I started heading out in that direction. And sure enough, I got to the end of the tarmac road, and it was worse than the couple of days before, because I was deep in the desert now. And before too long, I was dropping the bike, and I mean, it's like in that condition where it falls quite over quite flat. You know, I'm trying to get my tyres in it to give me a bit of leverage. You've got to strip all of the luggage off it. And yeah, I was getting very tired very quickly. I don't know if we'll show this road, last bit of gravel road that I hope to God I'm on. Still a long way to go though. It's a nightmare. I've dropped it. I think this is the 4th time. You know, sort of digging about kind of to get it up. Oh, you'll see pictures of the fallen glass. You can see I lose my posh accent when I'm under stress. So yeah, I think I said I dropped it, I don't know, 4 times then. I dropped it, I think, about 9 times in that day, and it was just draining the life out of me. In this one here, you can see that the clouds were coming in, and I was getting pretty worried that I was going to get a rainstorm. And I knew by then that I couldn't make the final town. There was a wee village further on, but even that was going to be too far because the night was starting to close in. And what you can't see in the photographs is the desert was kind of undulating. So you'd go down in lower bits, which would be really deep, thick sand. And then you'd kind of come up to a rise, which would be more rocky. So I decided that I'd camp, but, you know, camping wasn't that straightforward because now and again you'd see a bus or a truck a mile to the right of you, 500 yards to the left of you, because there was no road really. It was just like every person for themselves. So I thought, I don't really want to camp and get run over by a truck. So I decided once I got to the top of a kind of rocky section, I would turn left. I would ride for half a mile across the kind of rocky stuff. I would swing the bike around and face back the way I'd came from, because that's the only way I'd know that to go back in the morning. And then I would pitch the tent, and that's what I did. So as I said, I was completely exhausted. I'd probably been a wee bit nervous out there in the desert at night. If it hadn't been for the fact that I was so exhausted, I just slept like a log all night. And I woke up at 6 a.m. with renewed energy, and I knew my bike was pointing in the right direction. So I thought, okay, I'll get going and make it this time. I was nervous though, because I was low in water and low in fuel. But thankfully, I don't know, 20 miles further on or whatever, I came to a small village. Initially, you start trying to talk to people, and they're writing down that the next fuel's 70 kilometres, and I'm thinking, panicking, thinking there's no way I'll make it. But eventually, I just kept asking, and this wee guy on the right here said, follow me, and he'd get into his old jalopy, and I followed him, and he took me to a petrol station, which was just fantastic again. And I also went in, there's a wee supermarket where I went in and bought bottles of water. And I had breakfast there. I was trying to, again, it's nice meeting people. There was just a couple there. The old guy he put all my bike gear on, and he was wandering around with it, enjoying the heaviness of the bike gear, just thinking I was mad. And the lady was making me breakfast. I was doing chicken sounds, seeing if she had any eggs, but she didn't. So I ended up with some kind of the usual Russian soup for breakfast. But so from there on to the town was, I think I had a couple of falls, but I was getting more experience, and it wasn't as bad as it had been in the previous section. So finally, that night, I arrived in the town. I was really excited about it, and I thought, this is great. I'll get a hotel, I'll get a shower, it'll be, I'll get a really good meal. As far as towns, I mean, from all of my travels, this was the horriblest town I've ever been in. It's the worst hotel I've ever been in. It really is. It was like a nightmare. The shower wasn't working. There was live wires hanging from the ceiling. The door had been kicked in. There was rowdy drunk people outside my room all night. And there was nowhere to go and eat. I ended up buying a couple of bags of crisps from a supermarket. So my plan had been to get to Ulaanbaatar in 2 days, because it was 400 miles after that. And I thought, no. I woke up at 5 a.m, and just to add to it, there was a power cut. So I had my head torch. I thought, I'm going to Ulaanbaatar today. I'm going to go to a hotel. and I'm going to get a shower, and I'm going to be really typical. I'm going to go to the Irish pub, and I'm going to get a burger and chips and a pint of Guinness. So that was the absolute focus for that day. And the road was tarmac but terrible, but I just trundled on and moved on, and eventually got to the outskirts of Ulaanbaatar. And when I got there was this kind of, it's almost like a big Costa coffee type thing, a big modern coffee shop where they sold cakes, and it was like, oh, it's phenomenal. I went in there and got a real coffee and a piece of cake, and while I was sitting there, the 3 Russians came in. I thought, oh, okay. So they explained to me, they said, well, look, we're sorry our friend asked you to leave. They said, but there's a rally every year that BMW do. It's a competition for these type of bikes where they get the best from each country, and they go to somewhere exotic every year and they compete against each other. But they keep the location secret. I think they just don't want the public there. And apparently these guys were in with that rally in that location, so they couldn't take me there, was the excuse for leaving me in the desert, which was fine. That was fine. It was nice to see them. So I went into Ulaanbaatar and thoroughly enjoyed it. Again, it's a kind of crazy, mixed, cultured city. The thing I noticed about it, every second car was a Toyota Prius, which I just thought was, I don't know why, I still don't know why, but I just thought it was really, really strange that every second car was a Toyota Prius. And yeah, I get some good food, and I got a good hotel and a great shower, and just really chilled and enjoyed my couple of days there before heading north. So the road north, again, was allegedly a beautiful strip of tarmac, but what's happening is the Chinese are building the roads, but they're building them really cheap. So they'll be beautiful for the summer, and then they're probably deteriorating and really bad after that. I mean, I'm talking seriously, car-sized potholes, but better than sand. So I made my way up to northern Mongolia, and this is where I talked about that iOverlander app being useful. This was useful here because I was able to find a great little wild campsite in northern Mongolia, and you can see how the countryside has changed absolutely dramatically. I mean, it's lush green versus the desert to the south. So yeah, a nice night there, and then I was going to cross into Russia again. I was a little bit worried about the crossing because it being a dog's mule, I thought, what happens when I get to the border? Do they have me on record? Because they certainly registered me in a computer and everything. They made me fill forms, and I signed my confession, I guess. But thankfully, there was no worries. They didn't bother. They were really nice, and they let me in. And I headed the short distance up to the nice town of Ulan-Ude, which is just next to Lake Baikal, which is the big, huge freshwater lake, and it's the deepest lake in the world. And I spent a couple of days in Ulan-Ude, which again were very refreshing. It was just more modern, obviously, than Mongolia, even in Ulaanbaatar. And there was Russian national holidays going on, and I just landed in, and there was bands playing and opera singers singing, and it was just good. It was just a nice way to do it. And that was me back onto the Rus Motor Travel schedule here. So from now on, I knew that I was on the Trans-Siberian Highway. So I was thinking, it's just going to be a lush tarmac, no more stress from keeping the bike up. And but very big days. There was a minimum of 400 miles a day between the spots that I was going to, and in some cases it was 500 miles. But I was up for that and ready to roll. So I left Ulan-Ude heading for Kovd, and so I went out using the sat-nav, and a big mistake that we all make even over here is blindly following the sat-nav. So it took me out of town and took me onto a tarmac road. And this was the road here, and yeah, it looks fine. I kind of expected slightly wider or whatever for the Trans-Siberian Highway, but it's a fine road. And so I was riding along that and through nice countryside for probably 200 and odd miles. And suddenly it turned to gravel, good gravel, but gravel. And I thought, you quite often got that even further back west in that case, where they were doing roadworks that would be gravel for a couple of miles, but this gravel lasted and lasted. And eventually I pulled in at a petrol station and trying to talk to people about, you know, where I was, trying to have a conversation. Everybody was ignoring me, except this big Orthodox priest, and he had all the gear on and the black hat and the gold stuff and that, and he was brilliant. And, you know, couldn't speak a word of English, so we were just looking at the map, and we figured out between us that I'd taken a northern route, and I was on the Trans-Siberian Highway, and the next 120 miles were unpaved to the town that I was going to. So I had a choice. I could ride 220 miles back the way or ride forward. So obviously I wasn't going back the way. There was no connecting road in between. So I decided to keep going. And thankfully it was mainly good gravel, but at one stage, maybe for 50 miles or so, there was quite deep mud and a lot of water and stuff like that. So yeah, the last of my stressful roads wasn't over, but by that night, it was thankfully I was done with it and moving on. Now, after that, I was back on. I was making sure that I was going to stay on the Siberian Highway, Trans-Siberian Highway. So I was very, very careful leaving the town that morning. But my next destination was a roadhouse, because there was 1,000 miles between the two towns, and nothing basically. There was no cities. There was like small settlements with the side of the road. You couldn't see them anywhere because it was all trees and bog and all the rest of it. But the only place you could stay was this roadhouse at even Heavenary Parav or something. So that was my destination. And again, the roads were great. Everything was cool. And eventually I got there to this little roadhouse. I was prepared to camp out the back because I knew I could, but they had a room. And even that one didn't have any locks either, but that was fine because I just rigged up a lock using the straps that held on my bike tyres. So yeah, that was me. And I was then ready to move away the next morning. And the next morning's destination was in right in the border with China. So I'm riding along close to the border of China with China here, but this one was on the border, as in the River Clyde was separating Russia and China. So I would be able to see China for the first time. So that was quite an exciting one. And as you can see, I'd managed to get back on the highway and like the kind of bigger road, and that was the quality of the road basically all the way there. So it's not 2 lanes, but it's a major route for them. So eventually I got closer and closer to the city, and it was turning a lot more Chinese, funnily enough, looking with paddy fields and stuff like that. But suddenly there was like monsoon rains. It's like I've never ridden in rains like it. And riding into the city, I was riding through water that was almost like up lapping in my engine and my cylinder heads. And I genuinely thought this bike's definitely going to conk out. But I managed to make it to the hotel and put it under, the kind of foyer. So I was absolutely, even though I've got decent waterproof gear, I was soaked to the skin, to the extent that my iPhone was in there in a very waterproof pocket, but it was completely destroyed, which was a bit of a big blow, both financially and it was a useful tool, obviously, out there. But yeah, that's that. So I checked in. Staff were kind of unfriendly, but checked in, and I was getting stripped off and sorted out, and a knock came to the door, and it was a big burly security guy, very unfriendly, saying that I needed to move my bike. And I'm trying to say, you've got to be kidding me. But anyway, he took me downstairs, and he was trying to get me to get out into the streets again. I just thought, I'm not doing it. No. So eventually there was a kind of underground car park that I guess wasn't being used. It was kind of blocked a bit with some rubble, and I pointed down there, and we both took the bike down there, and that was it for the night. So that night, the rain was just throwing it down, so I stayed in and ate in the hotel. And I went back to my room, and you know how sometimes they leave a chocolate beside your bed? I thought, oh, perfect, a chocolate. So I opened it up, and it was a condom. Okay. So I thought, okay, right, I won't eat that. Put it back down. So next morning I went down, and I was checking it. I think, and the sun was shining, and the roads had dried up, and I thought, hey, one more stop, and then it's Vlad. So I was checking out, and it was kind of big queue, various people, and they said, yeah, that's your board, your dinner, yeah, beers, yeah, and a condom. I said, no. And then they're kind of looking at me, I thought, no, fine, okay, that's fine, I'll pay for the condom. So, yeah. But anyway, so I moved on from there, and I was heading again further out. What I should have said was that night when the big Russian guard made me take the bike down into the garage, I noticed that my tyre pressure in the rear was getting a bit low. So while I was on the trip in the next section, I thought I'd stop and take a proper look because it was gradually losing pressure. And to my horror, there was a nail in the back tyre. And I had you get plug kits with motorcycles where you can take the nail out and screw them in, but this nail head was below the surface. So I thought, I'll just leave it and hope it gets me the 1,000 miles to Vladivostok if I just keep inflating it every night, rather than try to deal with it now, because I thought I could make matters worse if I started to try and dig it out. So thankfully it did, it worked out, and it just by pumping it up each night, it was able to make it. So this Kharkiv was my final stop before Vladivostok. Again, a nice big city. I tried to get the iPhone repaired, but they couldn't repair it. They said they didn't have time to repair it. And I went to the kind of one biker landmark in the city, which is the Harley Davidson pub, which is basically just, I don't think it's got anything to do with Harley Davidson. It's basically a burger bar and beer bar, and it was nice, but it was good for a biker to get a photo at the Harley Davidson pub. And then I was ready for the final leg down into Vladivostok. As you can see, it's just across the sea from South Korea, just in Japan. It's on the border of China and North Korea, so it's well far east. And eventually, after a trouble-free ride, I got to Trail's End in Vladivostok, which there I'm looking out onto the Sea of Japan, and I'd made the first leg of the trip. Vladivostok itself is a beautiful city, and I kind of think, I thought it was kind of like San Francisco. It was like lots of hills, older buildings, very clean, very friendly, and big bridges. So it kind of put me in mind of San Francisco. So I spent, I think it was 3 nights there in total. The first priority was to get the tyre fixed, because if I was putting the bike on a train back to Moscow, I'd be coming back to a flat tyre and too much stress. So eventually I managed to find a BMW dealer. I went there to get the tyre fixed, and lo and behold, it was one of the 3 Russians that was the manager of the BMW dealership. So he sorted me out. Obviously I paid for it, but he just looked after me. So just again, these are the guys that you know, effectively saved me in the desert. And here he was in Vladivostok. After I got the tyre fixed, the next important thing was to get the bike to the train depot, the freight company, and it was difficult in terms of just trying to find where it was with the road signs and stuff, and the phone was gone and all the rest of it with the SIM. So it was, but eventually I found it, and we had good fun with the guys as they were loading my bike. They were enjoying the fact it was Scottish, and good fun with the ladies in the office that were giving me coffee, and there was no common language. But yeah, it was a nice time getting the bike prepared and getting it away. And after that, I could relax, and I wandered around Vladivostok looking at submarines in the main street, and yeah, just enjoying it in general. And from there, it was out to the airport, and I got a 747 with an 8-hour flight back to Moscow, which made me think I'm sitting there on an 8-hour flight, and I thought, I rode my motorcycle from Moscow to there. So it just kind of put into perspective how far the journey had been. So back to Moscow, back to Scotland, and I had a 3-week break, and Alex informed me that the bike was waiting for me in Moscow. So as I had 3 weeks holidays, I could only take a long weekend. So I flew out to Moscow and got the bike as quick as possible. I had to do a bit of reassembly. The Ducati behind it's the Dutch guys' Ducati, and because they had done the whole trip, they were kind of considered, I guess, premier class. I was economy class. They just gave me my bike and a bag of bits. So I reassembled it that night, and then I did some like mammoth miles back to Scotland, and it was honestly, my bum has never been so sore in its life. I've probably still not recovered from it. But I got back to Scotland, and that part of the trip was done. The big adventure was done. So there was a little in-between period. So I get back probably, I guess that's June, I get back, and the English fella, Graham Van Gass, who lives in Aberdeenshire, we got on pretty well during the trip. We'd kind of been wingmen to each other in the fuel stations. He had worked in the Baltics, so he had a little bit of Russian, which helped. And yeah, we enjoyed each other's company. So we decided we would meet up in the September, I think it was, of that year. So we met up at the Red Squirrel campsite in Glencoe, and along with another friend, and we had a good night in the Clahaig Inn, just catching up. And I was telling him about my American trip and the plans for that. And he was telling me that he was going back to Russia, to Vladivostok, to ride with Alex again and do the Road of Bones, which was the one that you and Charlie did out to Madigan. They call it the Road of Bones because they got people from the prisoners to build it, and thousands of them died, and they just buried them in the road. They just covered them in dirt in the road. So that's very much a dirt road. So he was really excited about that. I was excited about America, and he did say to me, he says, "Hey, do you fancy riding to Cape Town?" And I says, "No," but in my head I was thinking, yeah. So it might have happened, but so I was going in September, August. Graham was going in July, and he went out, and I contacted him, and he says, "Yeah, that's me getting to the edge of the Road of Bones." Then he sent me through some pictures of including one of Alex, the guy in the right there, was with him. And then he got on the Road of Bones, and then I didn't hear from him probably for about 5 days, 6 days. So I said, "How's it going, buddy?" Then 10 days, and I did a text that said, to Graham, "Do you read me?" Was actually what I wrote. And still no word. And I thought, but I mean, it's the Road of Bones, so it's not going to have 4G or whatever. So eventually, the friend that had been up in Glencoe with me suggested I ask Alex. So I asked Alex, "This is what's going on with Graham," and he came back with this message that said he's been in an accident. He was in an accident, and I thought, oh, it didn't sound good. So I googled it, and sure enough, he'd been killed in the Road of Bones with. He'd collided with an oil tanker or something, and it was like, I mean, I only knew the guy for 3 weeks. But, he was a big impact, and it was like he had the same aspirations, and yeah, it was a sad one. It was a sad one. But he lived adventure and he died adventure. He was just on the brink of his 70th birthday. So, rest in peace, Graham. So, that was the in-between, and then I feel bad moving on after this, but it's like, so I was ready for part two. And part two was going to be the US from San Francisco to Boston. And again, it's going to be a bit of camping, the Facebook group. And I was departing in August. So I'm ready to roll. So the bike was obviously going to be the same bike. So what I was doing, I was air freighting it. It's a company called Motor Freight that took the motorcycle the air freighted the motorcycle to Buenos Aires in Argentina for our other big trip. So they're just brilliant. They just did a great job. And yeah, the paperwork that I needed was much simpler there. I needed the ESTA, which maybe you've probably all got or had in the past going to America. And I needed a dangerous goods certificate for the bike, which the Motor Freight guys just guided me through the process. So it worked out really well. So this was the route. So land in San Francisco and basically ride through California and through the desert areas up into the Great Plains and then across all of the way to Boston. I planned to, and I did spend more of my time in the West and the East because I found the West more interesting for me in terms of scenery and history and stuff. So that's how I did it. So I took the transatlantic flight, and so KLM, Glasgow to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to San Fran, get off the flight, get a taxi to the freight office, filled in the paperwork, and they sent it to the warehouse, and I showed them the paperwork, and they said, okay, where's your truck? I says, I don't have a truck, I'm riding the bike. And they're saying, you're nuts? No, I'm riding the bike. Okay. So they brought the big box and they put it over. There's a yellow line there, you can see. They said, right, you've got to stay on that side of the yellow line and do with it what you want, and we can't help you. I says, okay, welcome to America. So I had a wee screwdriver this size, and there's these screws in that thing are, long, and I think there's about 18 of them holding that stuff on. So my hands were actually bleeding by the time I had unscrewed it all, and this was, it was after a transatlantic flight. But eventually I got it down to the pallet, and I was starting to unload that, and I thought, oh, this is going to be tricky getting this big thing off the pallet, once I unhook it. But thankfully one of the guys felt sorry for me and kind of sneaked across the yellow line and helped me push it off the pallet. And I was on my way into San Francisco, so a pretty smooth process, really, to be honest. So there was another guy, the guy that circled there is I call him Big Mac, because he is big. Big Mac was the American guy, and he lived in San Francisco. So when he heard that I was going to be doing this part of the trip, he invited me to go and stay there with him and his family for a couple of days, just to get acquainted. So that was absolutely perfect. The back of the house was looking out onto the bay, and I couldn't have asked for better hospitality. So I stayed there and got the bike, just made sure the bike was all good and ready to go, and I was ready to head east again. While I was there, Mark had said, do you mind if I ride with you for a few days? I think it ended up maybe 5 days or something. I says, no, that's absolutely fine. So Mark and I set off, and that's how we had bought some kind of similar bike, similar age, and we're just heading into Lake Tahoe and the nice pristine American roads. So it was a good start to the journey. And as we headed through into Nevada, so California into Nevada, we got into this Highway 50, which I read a lot about, and they said it's called America's loneliest highway, but no, it's not. It's no, the Dalton Highway in Alaska is definitely more lonely than that, that's for sure. But it's a brilliant highway. I absolutely loved it. I mean, it's the great big straight American roads, as you can imagine, but then you curve your way through the mountains. So I really, really was having a joyful, relaxing time. And some of the history stuff was great. I mean, this was just the Pony Express Trail, and you could see it as clear as day. That, I mean, it was absolutely clear where the horses had come along, and I just enjoyed stopping off and looking at that stuff, taking in the history. And obviously, being America, it was good food, good accommodation. So I was really enjoying the American experience. Eventually, we got to a place called, Mark had suggested, Moab, which I hadn't heard of, but it's a kind of adventure, Fort William, America. So, or Avivor of America, whatever. But it was a nice town, and it had all these national parks round about it with the big sandstone formations. And this was us in Arches National Park in Utah. So really, again, just you'll find that this part of the talk's a lot more relaxed in the way there was less stress to it. So Mark then headed off down to New Mexico. He was doing a loop south, and I headed on through the corner of Colorado and into Wyoming. And eventually I got to the Teton Mountains after a couple of days, which are the beautiful sawtooth type mountains. And I spent a couple of days in a campsite there. Campsites in America, official campsites in America, are absolutely brilliant. Absolutely expensive, but absolutely brilliant. They all come with a table, a picnic table, a bear safe to put your food in so as the bears don't eat it or eat you in the tent, and a fire pit. They're always well spaced out, or any that I've been in are well spaced out. And because I'm a senior and it was just off the holiday season, it was actually really quite cheap. So I just had a great couple of days riding around the mountains there. And from there, just close by, I went up through Yellowstone, which I'm sure some of you might have been to. But again, another great experience. You can see the weather's beautiful, the geysers and the buffalo, and just the scenery was just fantastic. And then I continued to head east. This was a place I stopped at, a hotel I stopped at called the Historic Hotel, and it really was historical. You really, it's like something out of the movies, and it was from that era. And I was the only person in the upstairs in a room. It seriously felt haunted, but it was really good. And the wee town was good. There was a wee local bar where I went and sat with the locals and had a great night. So it's just one of these finds on the road. And as was the Bighorn Pass, I'd never heard of the Bighorn Pass, but this was a twisty ride through the Bighorn Mountains that was just phenomenal scenery, phenomenal roads. You know, it was like the road to Apple Cross in steroids. It was really, really enjoyable. Finally, I got to South Dakota. I'd been looking forward to getting to a place called Sturgis, but before then I arrived into Deadwood, which was really nice. And I had a night in Deadwood and went to Buffalo Bill's bar where he was killed. And they were serving that. I'm standing there with a pint of beer, and they advertised that it was a big thing. This was beer that was authentic of the time and tasted like what it would have done in those days. And it was absolutely rancid. Don't ever be taken, don't ever be fooled. It was horrible. But the experience, the general town was nice. And then I was moving into Sturgis. And Sturgis is a huge motorcycle. Well, it's not a huge town. It's a small town that has a huge motorcycle rally every year where it just balloons in size. But it's very motorcycle focused. So it's great to visit as a biker. Lots of motorcycle shops, and they call it the Rider City there. And this was a Saturday night in Sturgis. Hi, it's just another Saturday night in Sturgis. Population 6,000 people. The self-care building of Sturgis Rally was tonight. Okay, here for the rally, just an hour quiet. Saturday night, just wandering around. I'm sharing a tour. See what happens. So it's just bizarre. It's like they just shut the town down and do motorcycle races, and they just piled sand in the middle of the street so as they had jumps to do. And it was like, I think, okay, this is great. It's different. It's great, enjoyable. Anyway, from there, Sturgis is right next to the famous Black Hills of Dakota, and so I had to go and visit Mount Rushmore. It's a must do. And did a lot of riding through the Black Hills. That Needles Highway was just spectacular. You're going through natural arches, and there's just phenomenal scenery all around you. There's another carving called the Crazy Horse carving, which has been underway for about 80 years or something. So it's like a rival to Mount Rushmore, and I found that was even more interesting because they're starting to get Crazy Horse's face in these horse. You're starting to see it now, but it's just an ongoing project, and it's much less commercial. But I really enjoyed it. And on the kind of Native American note, I did quite a big detour to go to Wounded Knee because I'm quite interested in Native American history. And Wounded Knee was where the last, you can call it the last battle or the last massacre. I would call it the last massacre was. And it's in the middle of nowhere, but it was quite poignant to see it. Where Chief Big Kettle and the rest of them came to an abrupt end. What blew my mind was that it's not in any way commercialised, and it's almost like I know that a lot of the Native American stuff have gone down the gambling route and that, and for me that could be commercialised in a very sensitive way, and they could do probably really well out of it. I mean, it's a major landmark. But from there, I headed north again, and I ended up camping in Badlands National Park, South Dakota, and I loved Badlands. It's all these low slung canyons where the outlaws used to, if they knew the land, they could easily hide out in that territory. And again, just beautiful American scenery and a cracking campsite and just a nice relaxing time. So that from there, I used up quite a lot of my time. As I said, I knew that the ride across the plains, unless I diverted big style, was going to be pretty much Highway 90 and flat and corn. So from out of the Badlands I popped onto Highway 90, and I made a big effort to get to the east, because my wife was going to be meeting me in Boston. She's got to get something out of the trip too. So, so as I went along, I probably was doing 300 and 400 mile days, but I've always been interested in Indian motorcycles, and actually, because my bike has been missing for quite a while, I've now got an Indian as well. And it was made in this factory in Iowa. So it's a place called Spirit Lake. So it was only like a 50-mile detour, 100 miles in total. So I went down to the factory and had a wee look around, and quite enjoyed being there where the bike was actually produced. And then I stayed a night in Niagara Falls, and I guess some of you might have been there as well, but I'd been told it was a pretty tacky city, and I found the Niagara Falls is lovely, but I thought it was tacky. In fact, it was the only place that I covered my bike up at night, because I was a bit concerned about its safety. But the falls themselves were definitely worth seeing, and my bike was fine, nobody touched it. So from there, I was in the last leg heading in towards Boston. And so again, I did another big day, and it was getting dark, and I booked into this Holiday Inn in Westboro, Massachusetts, which is probably maybe 30 miles outside of Boston. It's just I had worked for a company called Digital Equipment, and they were based in Boston, and so in the 80s, I'd spent quite a lot of time out there. We used to go out there we had a factory in Ayr, and we went out to the headquarters area and stayed in this Marlborough Holiday Inn. So I thought it'd be quite nice in my final night before reaching Boston, so as I could chill down, I'd go to the Marlborough Holiday Inn. So I arrived there in the dark. Again, I guess it was over 400 miles, and when I get in, there was all these Harleys everywhere. Everything was Harleys, just covering everything, which I thought was interesting. So I rode up to the foyer bit there and boldly reversed my bike in amongst the Harleys. And there's a bunch of guys all in the foyer drinking and smoking something, and really hardy looking boys. So I got off my bike and helmet off, and kind of walked up towards them and said, "How are you doing?" So it's like they started to talk to me, I'm talking to them. And one of them said, "So," they're quite mean looking, so he says, "So you're a Scotsman, an old Scotsman in a BMW, and you've just rode into a Harley meet." He says, "In your words, you're," and I'll say screwed, but it was harder than that kind of thing. And he put his hand into his pocket, and I just, for a second, I thought, he's at it. For a second, I thought, surely it's not going to end here. And he brought out a wee bottle of whiskey and gave it to me. He says, "Welcome to America." Great. So I thought, oh. So in I went, and Indian motorcycles and Harley are kind of rivals. I thought, right, Indian t-shirt is not going on tonight, that's for sure. I'll just keep a low key. So yeah, that was the final night. And then the next morning, I rode the 25 or whatever so miles into Boston, and I'd planned to go to the aquarium because I'd worked out where I could see the ocean from and where I might be able to stop in the bike, because nowadays obviously they're quite strict, especially in America, around where you're pulling up in cities. And I managed to get there, and my wife was waiting for me there, and I'd made it to the end, which was a great feeling. And it kind of wasn't over totally there, because we had a week's holiday there, and actually we both had a really good holiday, because normally I'm a bit hyper, and because I'd done all that, she says it's like I was totally relaxed, so it was a good holiday for both of us. But during that week, I decided I was going to put the bike into storage in America and get another bit of value out of the expensive shipping costs the next spring, maybe ride the Appalachian Mountains or something. So again, with the power of people's kindness, a guy that I had been working with, and I still haven't seen probably for over 30 years, I contacted him, and he says, my stepmom's willing to put it in her garage. So I walked out to the bike shop, I rode out to this place, Maynard, Massachusetts, and the lady let me put my bike in her garage with the view that I'd come back and get it in the spring. So this was Christmas this year. So the bike, based on COVID, of course, is still out there. So it's been out there since then. And I've had, I think, 4 trips planned based on hoping that COVID would release me and let me go get it. But currently, I'm feeling pretty confident that in 63 days from now, I'll be checking in. And in late April, I will be heading out to pick up the bike. So that was that. I do write about my travels when I'm going along. I say very clearly that I'm a biker who writes. I'm not a writer who bikes, so the emphasis is on the biking. But they're available in Kindle, both paperback and Kindle and Amazon, and they're pretty cheap if you're interested. If not, no worries. And my final slide is thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you. That was some adventure. And just to relax on the way back. Thanks so much. Do people have any questions or any comments or any observations about what we've heard? I mean, what struck me is when you're going through Mongolia is, did you have regrets that you went through Mongolia, given the trials and tribulations?
Definitely no regrets. It would have been much better. A lighter bike and a friend would have helped a lot.
I guess having somebody with
but it was at times it felt really tough.
Yeah. Must have been. Yeah, must have been. And did you have any? I mean, the food and the hygiene and stuff. Did you have problems? I mean, most people who travel around in sort of
in terms of stomach problems.
Which might have impeded your progress.
No, I was fine. I was never ill with it. I mean, I didn't like some of the food, but I wasn't ill with it. Yeah.
Okay. Any other? Yeah.
You say you're going back to correct your bike. What's your next?
Yeah, well, because of all the time that's taken place, and in between, what I found was when I brought the bike into the US, they gave me the wrong paperwork, so I can't ship the bike out of the US. And despite an attempt in San Francisco and an attempt in Boston to get it corrected, they were just saying, we're customs and you're not, and this is how it works. So I've got to ride it to Canada, ultimately, to take it out. So I'm going to go and ride to Chicago and meet a couple of friends who have got a hire car, and we're going to do Route 66, and then I'm going to ride up to Vancouver. So should be good.
And what about South Africa and Cape Town? Is that not? Of course, of course, the guy who was offering.
He did. But
that was terrible.
Yeah, who knows what might happen in the future.
Yeah.
Never say never.
No.
Never say never.
How do you budget for your trip? Sorry, apologies.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. How do I budget? Well, just to be honest, it's like my big interest, my big hobby. So when I was working, the savings were going towards that. And I do it as cheaply as I can, but it still costs quite a lot. But just that's what I spend my money on effectively, I guess.
What's the range figure?
Oh, in terms of numbers,
What you paid roughly?
yeah. So the which one, the Russian one and whatever I would say it probably cost something in the end of it £9,000 or something. It's the whole thing. Yeah,
there's a lot of that.
Including America.
In transporting the bike.
The bike to fly the bike costs £1,600, and I was hoping. I don't know.
Just like having another passenger.
Yes, it is. It's very much so an expensive passenger. But for all of my travels, I budgeted something like 20,000 over the years, and it's going to, even with the Route 66 thing, it will come under that. And that's just through camping, budget, hostels, whatever.
You must have a very tolerant wife.
Yeah, I thought I might get this. Yes, she's a very tolerant wife. She's actually sometimes glad to see the back of me.
Probably.
Yeah.
Sarah, you wanted to?
You seem to have an awful lot of luggage.
Yes.
What was it, mainly bike spares?
I guess there is. Yeah, there's definitely some bike spares in it, and there's camping gear. So the camping gear took up quite a lot. But other than that, not too much in the way of clothes and stuff like that. But mainly bike spares and camping gear.
Okay. Any other questions? I mean, the weather. You commented once about torrential downfall of rain, but most of the time it seems to be
lucky.
pretty good.
Yes, I was pretty lucky.
And did it ever get cold at night? And were there sub-zero temperatures? Or?
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, I think that in that Mongolian tent it might have been cold, but I was so exhausted, I genuinely didn't feel it. And I've got quite good gear, inner bags and good sleeping bags and stuff like that. But no, it was never icy.
And did you not have any mechanical problems with the bike?
No, it's been brilliant. It never broke down. It's just me throwing it down, causing some of the troubles.
But so, in spite of your best endeavours, it held up.
When it came back from when I got back from the Mongolian trip, the Russian trip, the guy serviced it, but what his comment was that he could make a sandpit for his kid out of the air filter with the Gobi Desert sand. He genuinely turned it up and it was like flying out. But it's a strong bike. It really is.
And how long was that? I mean, you must have 80-odd thousand miles now. So, what? And you were saying earlier that you're looking forward to getting to 100,000. But how much longer would you expect it to?
There is people that you read about in that Boxer engine, because it's an old style engine, has done 250,000.
Wow.
So there's always somebody better than you.
No bother with the grade of fuel.
No, it handled it. I mean, in South America, we're getting some really rubbish fuel, but it handled it. So.
Yeah, there's a question coming through from YouTube. I was curious to know why you named your bike Boris.
Well, it was before the Boris, I can tell you that.
Well, that's a relief to hear.
Yes, it was before the Boris. It was just because it's a German bike. And Boris was a German bike.
Okay. So
it was well before the Boris.
Okay.
I think I changed
if it had been a British bike, it would have been Smith.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Have we any other questions? Okay.
Do you have you obviously have lots of highlights, but do you have a top highlight from your trip that stands out for you?
I would say the ride east. The guy took me up on the steppe in Mongolia, and I was just riding freestyle across the plateau. I think that was a major highlight. Plus, I had the comfort of him being there if I fell, because you don't know what you're coming to. You come to a soft bank of sand. So I would say that. And America, I loved the desert country. I loved the Arches National Park and stuff like that.
I mean, one of the kind of themes for the whole trip is that you comment almost wherever you've been, how friendly people are, and how welcoming, whether it's in America or whether it's in Mongolia or Russia, and that's just really, when you hear all the strife that's going on in the world, all our experiences are, really
they were genuinely, really friendly, and even the Harley guys at the end were winding me up, which worked. But
that's nice. That's good. That's a nice note to finish on. So thanks again for coming all the way up. Okay, just before we let you go, Steve hasn't mentioned it, but he raises money up with these trips for Deafblind Scotland, a really good charity. And so if you do feel inclined to just put a little bit of something in the box as we leave to support that endeavour, that would be really appreciated. And just final observation is that we're back again in a fortnight's time for our penultimate, which is due to be our last talk of the programme, but it's a penultimate one because Peter Mackay, who some of you will know, was here a fortnight ago, is going to return to do again. I was going to say complete, but I think to give us the whole talk again on Lord Reith. So we've got 2 more talks in a fortnight's time and in 4 weeks' time. So hopefully see you back here for those final talks of the year. Thanks again for coming out. Thanks for being.